So, it's been a week since Percy Jackson's finale, and I finally compiled all my thoughts and discussions I had with friends about the show and decided to put it all in one big video. I have been kind of conflicted on how I feel about this show because I was so hyped for it and I was convinced with all the trailers and the promo that it's going to be my new favorite show. And my final verdict is that I liked the show, but I didn't love it. It was okay. And I will explain my whole reasoning for why I felt this way in an excruciating detail. So let's talk about the good and the not so good in this deep dive of Percy Jackson and the Olympian series. On January 25th, 2022, Variety broke the news that Disney officially greenlit Percy Jackson. Rick Riordan himself announced the series pickup in an exciting video message.
Wait is over, demigods. I am thrilled to be the first to tell you that Percy Jackson and the Olympians is really, truly, and for sure coming to your screens.
The author promised a faithful adaptation with him being deeply involved in every aspect. I was super excited because the movie adaptation took a lot of creative liberties and tried to tell their own story, which ultimately failed. Fans weren't interested in that, which resulted in lukewarm commercial reception. So the pressure was on for this new adaptation. When Walker Scobell was revealed as Percy, my anticipation skyrocketed. I saw The Adam Project twice, and I loved that movie. He was great in that. It's a perfect casting choice for Percy. And when the rest of the trio was cast, Ariane Simhadra as Grover and Leah Jeffries as Annabeth, I was so happy. I gotta say the entire cast of Percy Jackson is a 10 out of 10, but I would maybe argue on Lin-Manuel Miranda's casting as Hermes, but I'm not too bothered about it. Anyway, I was very curious how would Disney approach adapting Percy Jackson as a series, because adapting a first-person narrative presents its challenges already, because much of the story unfolds through Percy's inner thoughts and observations. So they really had to leverage the visual medium to showcase events beyond Percy's POV. One thing we can all agree on is that a TV show is the best medium for Percy Jackson, because the book itself has a very episodic structure where on their journey the characters have to go on side quests and fight mini-bosses before they reach their final destination. I've been closely following fandom reactions on each episode, and the general consensus is that the audience had a similar reaction to mine. The show was somewhat underwhelming. Fans are pointing out the obvious pacing problems of the show, some right out say the show is boring, some people say that the show lacks action, and the most repeated complaint I have seen online is the show and not tell problem. Despite the criticisms fans were sharing online, we all recognize the huge potential of this show and what it can be, and what it will be. But for now, I will attempt to break down each episode so we can look at the structure and writing to see where this criticism is coming from.
Just for clarity, how sure are we you can just explain everything in an email?
Percy Jackson is a story of a 12-year-old boy who discovers that he is a demigod. Percy learns that he has special abilities and he's sent to Camp Half-Blood, a training ground for demigods like himself. Together with his companions, Percy embarks on a journey to prevent a war between the gods of Olympus.
That's such a good premise, right? But let's see how writers fumbled the bag with this one.
Starting with episodes 1 and 2, because in my opinion it should have been one long episode since we don't learn the dramatic premise of the story until the end of episode 2. I must say the first episodes are most challenging episodes to write, especially for a fantasy show, because you have to present so much exposition, set up the story, introduce the new world and its rules, as well as establish the characters and their goals and motivations. And the writers crammed as much info as possible in these 2 episodes. I like how they handled the introduction to Percy through his narration. In the first 3 minutes of this episode, we learn everything we need to know about him, like who Percy is, what are his struggles, what is the world like around him. It's goofy, it sets up the tone of the show, and we are hooked. I like how the show hints at the villain through Percy's dreams. It adds a little bit of mystery. I like that the show is spending time fleshing out Percy's relationship with his mom. One of the themes of the story is the relationship with your parents and parenting in general. It gives us more insight into him and Sally. Plus, with this scene, they're also setting up the conflict of the show.
Not everyone who looks like a hero is a hero. And not everyone who looks like a monster is a monster.
I love the scene where Percy shares with his mom that he thinks something is wrong with him, that his brain is broken, and he's trying so hard to navigate his struggles, but something always goes wrong. It is an emotional scene and Walker delivers a wonderful performance.
This is crazy. Okay, I'm not a god. There is something wrong with my brain.
Now, speaking of things that I didn't like or wasn't completely on board with, my biggest complaint so far is how the show handles exposition, and I'm not alone in this. For some reason, the show doesn't trust the audience to connect the dots, and as a result, we're being spoon-fed all the information about world building and the plot itself. And I have nothing against exposition, because without it, the audience would be lost. Especially if you're not familiar with the books or with Greek mythology. I get it, but the way show delivers exposition comes off as unnatural and forced. For example, let's look at how Sally is explaining to Percy who he is.
Told you about how gods and mortals would sometimes have
Mom,
children
please
together,
stop.
children called
Mom.
demigods, and sometimes they are known as half-bloods. Terrible forces are drawn to them, driven to harm them before they can become strong enough to fight back.
Nobody talks like that in real life. This dialogue seems like it was written for a book, not for a TV show. Okay, moving on. Grover shows up announcing.
So something's coming.
Grover.
Why do they have to announce it? I get that they need a reason to drive up to camp for the plot to move forward, but announcing what's coming just kills the anticipation in my opinion. Grover acts as the main exposition tool in this episode, and we don't have a chance to get to know him as a character. He spits out his lines about the camp, the mist, and the mythomagic cards like he's reading off a teleprompter. I'm not joking.
You told him about camp, right?
Camp is a sanctuary for half-bloods, a safe space where you can learn who you are and what the world is like on the other side of the mist. The mist. It's the veil that hides the magical world from the human world.
And I'm not talking about Aaron's performance here, because the guy's doing his best. The dialogue just didn't feel organic. It slows down the story and removes the mystery element. If the writers had removed this entire exposition dialogue, just leaving the action in, the Minotaur chase would have a better dramatic effect. The dialogue just didn't feel organic, plus if we cut half of it, everyone would understand what Camp Half-Blood is and how the barriers work with visuals alone. I didn't want to bring the movie into this, but I'll just show you this one scene.
We're here! Mom, what are you doing?
This is as far as I can go.
You get what I'm saying, right? Okay, in the next scene, car crashes. The goal is to get to the camp as fast as possible because the monster is supposedly still chasing the characters. And I say supposedly because the Minotaur is actually just chilling in the background, roaring in the distance while patiently waiting for the characters to finish their emotional conversations so the action can continue. Then Percy kills the monster and it just cuts to black. And the episode kinda ends there. This scene felt to me like a midpoint of the episode. As a pilot, it was such a weak episode because the story hasn't even begun. We were about to enter this amazing camp and learn why it was so important for Percy to get there, but the episode just ends. If I had to wait another week for the story to get going, I would be very annoyed. But luckily Disney released episode 1 and 2 together. The second episode suffers from the same issues. It is very exposition heavy, and we meet new characters, but we do not get to know them. Annabeth is one of the main characters, yet we don't get to spend much time with her. Luke is just announcing her entire MO for some reason.
Annabeth is the strongest warrior in camp.
Luke acts as our exposition guy in this episode. He's kind of watching over Percy, showing him around camp and explaining the lore. Luke also introduces the new concept of kleos, or glory. In basic terms, if you get glory, you get cool points, and your Olympian parents might notice you. Luke explains to Percy that a display of bravery and strength, or completing a quest, or defeating a monster, will attribute glory to a demigod's name. The only thing we learn about Luke is that he's a son of Hermes, and that he's good friends with Annabeth, and that the other campers don't mess with him and see him as leader because of glory. That's it. You see why it's a problem considering the reveal that is coming in the finale? But more on that later. Back to exposition dumping.
Before camp, I was on the road. Me and a forbidden kid I met along the way. Her name is Thalia.
And what does that mean, forbidden?
A long time ago, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades agreed their children were becoming too powerful, so they made a pact not to father anymore. And it held for a long time until Zeus broke that pact. Until Thalia. A forbidden kid attracts trouble. Monsters everywhere, just constant battle to stay alive.
Dude, who talks like that? There are so many ways the writers could have executed the reveal of that information. They could have reworded the sentences in a much more natural way. For example, Percy could have asked, "Oh, why some cabins are empty?" or "Whose cabin is this?" There is no inventiveness to make those conversations real and exciting. And again, the exposition could be cut down to just visuals in some instances. We're not stupid, we can understand things without an explanation from one of the characters. The constant exposition dump is also hurting the tension and the dramatic action of the story. And I have a theory why exposition is so blatantly noticeable in Percy Jackson. I might be wrong. Take Harry Potter, for example. Similar premise, a boy discovers he is a wizard and he must learn about the world and the rules from different characters. Our main guide into the magical world is Hagrid, who similarly delivers many lines of exposition to Harry. As an audience, we're just like Harry, who know nothing about the wizarding world or Hogwarts, and alongside him, we experience the joy and excitement of it all for the first time. Harry's reaction shots to whatever Hagrid is telling him are absolute gold. The success of this entire franchise was the result of the fact that Harry had zero knowledge of the magical world. Even in Deathly Hallows, which was the last film, there was always something new to discover. It constantly engages the audience and we're always left craving more. Percy is a different type of protagonist. First of all, his mom has been prepping him to be a part of the magical world of demigods without him knowing it. He knows all the myths and he has extensive knowledge of the gods and the rules, so when Percy arrives at camp, he doesn't look all that impressed. Yes, he just lost his mom and he is angry at the father who wouldn't claim him, but dude, you literally saw a Greek god in a centaur for the first time in your life. Whenever Percy would learn a new piece of information or see something cool, he looks unimpressed. You get the gist, right? Another important aspect of Percy Jackson is the fact that it mainly takes place in the real world. The brief encounters with the Olympian gods and retelling of the myths or the introduction of monsters doesn't have this immersive effect against the backdrop of real cities. So maybe that's why we're not digesting the exposition all that well, besides how horribly written it is. I'd love to read your thoughts on it in the comments. Speaking of positive things, I liked the look of camp and the cabins. The set design was fucking awesome. It's sad that the heroes almost immediately had to leave the camp in the next episode, because to me it didn't feel like we spent enough time in camp. I think I like the montage of Percy trying to figure out what he's good at It's cool and it's straight out of the book. It certainly slows down the pacing of the episode in my opinion. And unfortunately, the build-up of Luke and Percy's friendship is barely happening. Maybe if the writers had replaced this scene with Luke training Percy and expanded it with meaningful dialogue, where characters confide in each other or share their struggles, the betrayal in the finale would have been more impactful. Because Luke is an amazing character, and there are a lot of interesting parallels between him and Percy. I love the entire Capture the Flag sequence. I think it does a good job at expanding the characters and their motivations, and the action itself is very engaging. It was well choreographed and felt really immersive. Speaking of Capture the Flag, I loved Clarice. Dior Goodjohn is fantastic in this role. She's a real menace. If she wasn't such a bully, I would be rooting for her. I don't know who they were kidding when Luke said Annabeth is the strongest warrior at camp. We can clearly see who is the strongest. I mean, it's believable that Luke is the best swordsman, but I think Clarice would absolutely body him.
Yeah, glory's fine. Revenge is more fun.
The scene where Percy gets claimed by Poseidon is spectacular. The added voiceover from Chiron makes it much more grandiose. I would have loved if this was the ending of episode 1. Then episode 2 could have started as Percy learns about the quest. I didn't like how the need for Percy to go on a quest was revealed. Because Chiron and Mr. D already knew that Lightning Bolt was stolen and that Zeus and Poseidon had beef about it for months, right? Mr. D gives a speech about the powerful forces at work here that have laid waste to Earth before. They only revealed this information to Percy after Poseidon had claimed him, and my question is, if Percy hadn't been claimed, they would have not told him about the quest? Because upon Percy's arrival at camp, Chiron tells him you cannot force gods to do anything, and Luke kinda confirms it. So really, Poseidon might have taken his sweet time until claiming Percy. Am I making sense? They say that the fate of the world hangs in the balance and the clock is ticking. Percy only has 1 week left, so why are we just learning this information? Despite that, this episode managed to set up a few things right. I love how the show introduced the gods to us, and what kind of parents are they?
Why do they get to bring us here to just ignore some of us?
Spend too much time trying to figure out why the gods do whatever it is they do. You'll drive yourself crazy.
This line from Chiron that half-bloods can do things for gods they are forbidden to do for themselves sums up it pretty nicely, and it will play out in future episodes. I quite enjoyed Percy in this episode. I love how he questions everything and his discontent towards gods and his father in particular. Sometimes it's really on the nose. For example, Percy has another dream about a hooded figure who says to him, "Oh, he left you here. I know how you feel. You want what's been taken from you. You want justice." We know that Percy feels abandoned and frustrated with his dad for ignoring him, and of course he wants his mom back. Moving on to episode 3. Episode 3 is where the story truly begins. Our heroes receive their quest along with a prophecy, the stakes are clear, the deadline is set, and we are anticipating the resolution of this big conflict with Zeus. Ticking clocks are incredibly powerful in building momentum and keeping the tension up. Plus, we have a prophecy that sets up a betrayal from one of whom Percy calls a friend. That's a nice mystery element. In this episode, the writers are playing up that prophecy about the friend's betrayal, trying to cause Percy to doubt his companions. But after episode 3, they kind of abandoned that storyline entirely until the very last episode. We're finally starting to get to know the trio. I enjoyed their interactions, and the conflicts are starting to build up. The tone of this episode matches the general tone of the books, and it doesn't take itself too seriously. But man, some jokes felt out of place.
Free? She was the bravest demigod I ever knew. She fought valiantly, and she met a hero's fate.
She met a pinecone's fate.
The narrative delves into themes of parental legacy and personal responsibility, reimagining the tragedy of Medusa to underscore the nuanced nature of monsters and heroes. I like how they handled Medusa's story. It echoes nicely with what Percy's mom had said about not all monsters are monsters. Here Medusa is quite sympathetic and less villainous because she was ultimately a victim of God's games. Medusa's lair looks cool. The action scene where the trio is supposed to find Medusa is more horror-based because she's stalking the trio rather than chasing them. It was anticlimactic in my opinion, and the anticipation really fell apart when the kids figured out who the Garden Emporium belonged to. The lack of tension in fighting monsters is a recurring problem in the series, and it will only get worse. Those kids are tackling those side quests and killing monsters like they are Power Rangers. They come into any situation fully prepared, never caught off guard, and their opponents are being so nice about it, sharing their menacing plans with them. Yes, I understand Annabeth is the daughter of Athena and she is the most formidable demigod alive, but she's just 12 years old. Take Alecto for example, one of the Furies Hades sent to retrieve Percy. We get this unnecessary scene where she explains her entire plan and gives the trio a good amount of time to escape, completely dissipating the tension that should have enveloped the scene.
In this episode, writers tried to give Grover more personality. We learn about his aspirations to find this elusive god of wilderness Pan, about his burdens, specifically the guilt he's carrying over his past failures. It's too bad the writers didn't explore his guilt in more depth. Grover definitely brings much needed lightness and humor, even though most jokes are aimed at children. What I didn't like was that Grover was translating everyone's feelings for the audience. Just take a look at this.
It's the only thing she's ever possessed that connects them. That ought to matter to you. Can you imagine how confusing that must be for him? Feeling like he may have to choose between the fate of the world and the fate of the only person who's ever cared about him.
And not only Grover is guilty of this, Percy does this too.
And now I'm feeling so alone. I don't know what to think or who to trust.
Dialogue just boldly states their thoughts and feelings without any subtlety. You know what this reminds me of?
I'm in agony. I can't breathe. You are in my very soul, tormenting me.
I'm sorry.
And don't try to give me this shows for kids bullshit, because if a piece of media is aimed at children, it doesn't have to be dumb.
So that's it for episode 3. Episode 4 is where a lot of things improve. The show is finding its footing and the plot moves forward. Pacing and dialogue somewhat improved. The actors feel more confident in the roles. I love the scene on the train where Annabeth and Percy share their perspective on their relationships with their parents. It felt more natural. The humor is still sprinkled in weird places and the tone of the show suffers from it.
He's super grouchy when he doesn't get enough. Yeah.
Who's Froofy? You're Froofy!
The writers could have cut Grover's entire dialogue about being annoyed and mumbling nonsense, and the dramatic impact from Percy and Annabeth's conversation would have been that much stronger. Speaking of drama, the aspect of stakes and tension also improved quite a bit. This is the episode where kids are faced with the consequences of their actions. It's nice to see Percy's impertinence being a plot point, and how Athena allows monsters inside her temple to punish her daughter for embarrassing her, which is incredibly petty and cruel. The build-up to Echidna and Chimera made sense and tied into the main themes of the show, plus our heroes are more reactive. Percy's getting poisoned worked great and elevated his sacrifice. Loved the moment when Percy switched with Annabeth, and it was also great seeing that Annabeth was prepared to do it herself. We get that sweet character development, which I'm very happy to see. However, this episode frustrated me so much because, again, it ended on what felt like a midpoint of an episode. Overall, the structure was all over the place. The writers put the kids on the moving train where Echidna was chasing them. We got a sense of entrapment and claustrophobia. the nowhere to run type of situation. Then somehow the train stopped, the kids got off, and we get a scene where the trio slowly walking away. But before, Annabeth has to explain that this is the hunting part. Well, thank you very much for explaining that to us, because without it, I would be lost. All the sense of danger and urgency immediately evaporates, and the writers are forced to build it up again. I don't understand why they're making things more complicated for themselves. And speaking about the ending, dramaturgically, it was good. Percy learns to breathe underwater. It's an emblematic moment symbolizing his acceptance of his divine heritage and his embrace of the challenges that lie ahead. However, the episode leaves us on a weird cliffhanger and tons of unresolved tension. Here, they could have extended the dialogue with Nereid and finished the episode on Percy getting out of the water, perhaps using his powers. I don't know. Okay, moving on. Episode 5. Episode 5 is my favorite episode, I think. It's a direct continuation of the story. It takes place literally minutes after the ending of episode 4. This episode achieves a lot of things. It was entertaining and the tone was consistent. Ares makes his grand entrance, steering the pot with mentions of Kronos and injecting much needed tension into this narrative. The episode delves into the recurring theme of God's cruel disregard towards their own kin. Grover shines here, reminding Percy of their purpose and the sacrifices they may face on their quest. Percy steps up as a leader, displaying his courage in the face of danger. Annabeth's beliefs are challenged and she changes her views after Percy shows her what's important. Themes of power, glory, and morality and what makes a hero takes center stage, as it should. Ares perfectly embodies that eat or be eaten mentality, emphasizing power above all else. However, Annabeth begins to question this worldview, recognizing its flaws and complexities. Percy too undergoes significant growth, not afraid to confront Ares directly by the end of this episode.
I'm gonna smoke your banana, mother.
No.
I'm sorry, I had to do it. In this episode, the writers find interesting ways to execute the exposition. I think showing the Hephaestus story play out while Percy and Annabeth are taking their boat ride was quite creative. But I spoke too soon and they immediately went back to their old ways when Percy was explaining Hephaestus' story to Annabeth, like she didn't know it already. I don't know how I feel about Hephaestus snapping his fingers and helping them. Talk about Deus Ex Machina. The entire chair scene was a plot device to make the episode seem more emotional and make Annabeth draw her conclusions about gods and how bad they are. But Percy kind of sacrificed himself in the last episode as well, which tones down the dramatic impact. Okay, moving on. Episode 6. From here, everything goes downhill for me. This episode caused an uproar among fans, including me. It literally took a turn no one expected, and the changes that were made were so dumb. I'm actually angry right now when recording this because for some reason the writers decided it would be a great idea to throw out the window the most important dramatic aspect of the entire show. The fuck? Remember how I said that the deadline is a crucial device that creates tension and builds up the anticipation to conflict resolution? Let's rewind a couple of episodes back and refresh our memory on the building up to this conflict.
An ultimatum has been given to him by Zeus that if he doesn't return the bolt by the summer solstice in 1 week, there will be war.
The fate of the world hangs in the balance. You will accept this quest.
The
quest is a sacred thing.
Seems like something we ought to be taking a little more seriously.
Yeah, the writer said fuck all that. It didn't matter in the end. Why do we need the sense of urgency and imminent doom? Nah, things are casual, nothing is happening, no consequences, it's business as usual. We will come back to this point in the next episode, I promise. For now, let's take a look at other things that did not make sense to me in this episode. Number 1. Prematurely revealing Luke as a lightning thief is not a good decision in my opinion. One of the things that helps keep suspicion of him before the reveal in the end is the fact that he has no motive. Including the backstory about Luke blaming his father for what happened to his mom, and his father showing up and Annabeth saying that Luke hates him. It's not difficult to put 2 and 2 together and figure out who is the thief. In season 1, Luke doesn't need to be a fully developed villain. He wasn't going to bring the book. But his role as a villain works due to an unexpected twist in the end and the emotional impact of Percy being betrayed by someone he trusted. Gradually revealing more details in later seasons about Luke's motivations could have made him a more compelling and sympathetic character over time. However, by making it so evident early on that he is the lightning thief, it takes away from the suspense and the intrigue of the narrative. I don't know how many times I've repeated this sentence. Despite Luke's attempt to deflect suspicion onto Clarice, which is a clever addition not present in the original books, it's still going to be incredibly obvious to anyone who's ever watched a film or a TV show that Luke is going to betray everyone. Quick side note, is it me or Luke saying that Annabeth and Percy are acting like old married couple was weird?
When did you turn into an old married couple?
The show needs to pull the brakes on trying to establish the romance between these 12-year-olds. We get it. Stop it. You're being weird. Okay, number 2. Lotus Casino was such a missed opportunity. The heroes are pulling up to the Lotus Casino to meet Hermes so he can provide them a safe passage to the underworld. They walk in, Percy wants to have some fun, Annabeth is expectedly being a buzzkill, and then, of all people, Grover brings up the Odyssey and reveals how this casino entraps people.
Your mom told you all the stories. Did she read you the Odyssey? Odysseus lands on a beach. There's these guys who've forgotten where they came from, forgot everything that was important to them. And they got that way because they ate the lotus flowers.
The constant announcement of stakes upon the characters' entry into any scene drains so much enjoyment from the show. Why not have kids look around, interact with people in the casino, and then realize that something fishy is going on? For some reason, the show won't allow these kids to make any mistakes or behave like kids. What's the fun of watching characters on screen breezing through any obstacles like it doesn't matter? How impactful would it be if it was the kids' fault that they missed the deadline, or if they nearly missed it by being stuck playing video games? You can have character growth if characters don't make mistakes to learn from them, if you know what I mean. Instead, it looked like Hermes was stalling them on purpose, so they would miss the deadline. Why else would he announce, "You missed the deadline"? I have no answer for you. And lastly, why make the scene that's completely unimportant to the plot more exciting and tense than the scene that progresses the story? I'm talking about the car driving scene. It's concerning when Percy's learning to drive a car feels more significant than the entirety of Lotus Casino sequence. The series' decision to make Percy, Grover, and Annabeth succumb to the casino powers, despite their resistance, undermines their important failure in the book. Okay, I know I'm bringing the book again, but in the books, our heroes decide to stop at the Lotus Casino when looking for somewhere to briefly rest on their hard journey, And having already battled several monsters and still having a week before reaching the summer solstice deadline, the trio decides to indulge in playing a few games. The series' decision to make Percy, Grover, and Annabeth aware and resistant towards the casino powers undermines their important failure in the book. I wasn't going to bring the book into this, but I feel like I have to. In the Lightning Thief novel, the 12-year-olds decide to stop at the Lotus Casino to rest. Having already battled several monsters and still having a week before reaching the summer solstice deadline, the trio decided to indulge in playing a few games. And in the books, Percy did figure out that there was something wrong with the casino and that it had trapped people. But it didn't happen right away. There was a build-up and payoff to it, you know what I mean? Okay, I think I'm done. On to the next episode. I feel like the writers are taking the piss out of us at this point. Tell me why they thought it would be a good idea to write this dialogue.
I know who you are. You're Procrustes, son of Poseidon and murderer of travelers. The beds are a trap. That's how you do it. How you murder your guests. I know there's a secret passage to the underworld here.
This crusty guy is just there to reiterate for the millionth time that gods are the bad guys and how they neglect their kids. It is so frustrating to watch how showrunners choose to spend their precious runtime. Where is the sense of adventure, mystery, magic? I feel like the writers have lost sight of what makes good storytelling in an attempt to adapt the original material as closely as possible. Every scene should serve a purpose, right? It has to advance the story, develop characters, or evoke emotion. The Krusty scene achieves none of that. The characters are just there to exchange information they both already know. I'm not even going to talk about Grover losing his pearl because this is the dumbest thing ever. Did it matter in the end? I think not, so moving on. One thing that made me laugh is when Percy finds the lightning ball in his bag and Grover's like, "Fuck Zeus, he can wait, let's go save your mom." I mean, he's a good friend, but why are they not scared of the consequences? The portrayal of gods in the show and how other characters perceive them definitely needs improvement if the show wants us to take the stakes seriously. So far, gods in the show are petty, selfish, and honestly, they look weak. Anyway, moving on. One thing I'm conflicted about is flashback to Percy's childhood. On one hand, I appreciate having more insight into Sally's struggles as a parent of a demigod. I like that Sally's relationship with Poseidon is more developed. My issue is with the way they worked those scenes into the structure of an episode, specifically how they cut them, considering it's one big sequence. In one scene, the kids are fighting a hellhound, in the next scene, Sally talks to a school principal, or we watch Percy realize that Kronos is the villain all along, and the next scene, Sally's having a conversation with Poseidon in a cafe. Come on. The change of the point of view from Percy to Sally doesn't do show any favors, and it slows it down significantly. I understand the importance of those scenes for Sally's character, but to me they feel out of place in this particular episode. Switching between school scenery and the underworld is not engaging or fun.
Why are you doing this?
Hades was alright. He's a pretty chill guy in the books, but I feel like they didn't fully capture Hades' intensity. Like, that's ruler of the underworld, you know, that should bear some weight. Despite him being laid back, it's Hades we're talking about. He should be scary and menacing. Plus, he should be angry. He thinks kids stole his helm, and his palace should also reflect that. I get that the show didn't have the budget to present Hades in his godly form or dress up his palace. but at least show that he's furious, shaking his palace or raising his voice like in the books. But he's just too casual. Okay, let's talk about the biggest reveal of the show. Kronos. I don't think I'm mad about Percy figuring out that Kronos was a villain all along, because the writers dropped enough clues throughout the episodes that point to him. Ares name dropped Kronos, Percy was dreaming about the mysterious hooded figure, plus Sally was teaching Greek mythology to Percy, and Kronos is like Greek mythology 101, you know. My issue is how the characters react to it, or rather the absence of appropriate reaction. Kronos is a titan. He's so evil, he devoured his own children. Hades should have had more visible reaction to learning such info, don't you think? Percy and Grover should be fucking scared, or at least show some sort of emotion. Same goes for Hades. His reaction to finding out his dad is going to start a war is giving me nothing.
Huh?
I have nothing more to add. The finale. Surprisingly, overall, I liked this episode. I thought it would be difficult to salvage the plot after the stakes have been erased, but the show managed to tie up loose ends where they could and end on a high note. Let's start with Luke. Luke is one of my favorite characters in the show, and him narrating the opening of the episode was very exciting. It paralleled nicely with episode 1. As I mentioned before, I think the scene where Luke trains Percy would have worked better in the earlier episode. I understand the intention behind including it in this scene. It parallels the fight with Ares and how Percy outsmarts and defeats the god of war with the knowledge that Luke gave him. But after episode 2, Luke had no screen time, and suddenly he's narrating this episode, and there is also a flashback of him and Percy training. The show is so blatantly pointing the finger at Luke, which takes away from the reveal at the end.
We know who stole the bolt.
How do you know?
We need to be kept out of mind of someone who will commit a betrayal later on and avert the audience's suspicion till the very end. Not give it away in the first second of the episode.
How do you know?
The battle with Ares was very well executed. I think it's the first time I started noticing interesting camera angles, and the editing was very nice and dynamic. Nothing much to say here. Dialogue is corny and inauthentic as usual. I love how the writers always shooting themselves in the foot, trying to create an impactful moment, and then one of the characters will say something so dumb and completely erase the importance of the moment. And that character is usually Grover.
Just for clarity, how sure are we you can just explain everything in an email?
I'm sorry. On a similar positive note, Olympus looks cool, grand, and majestic. A bit empty, but everyone is preparing for war, so I guess they're all busy. Lance Reddick, may he rest in peace, is the perfect Zeus. He has such commanding and intimidating presence, and you could feel his authority through the screen. He brought a sense of power and majesty to the character, but also came off as prideful, stubborn, and petty. The show totally nailed the essence of Zeus.
Boy!
Now let's go back to what everyone was so pissed about, and of course I'm talking about Percy missing the summer solstice deadline. I believe I found an explanation for myself as to why the writers removed the significance of it. It all ties in with the concept of glory that the show introduced in episode 2. At least that's my theory. I might be wrong. I think it all boils down to Zeus not wanting to lose his glory and Poseidon sacrificing his glory for his son. Let's look at it this way. The only direct consequence of the trio missing the deadline is Poseidon's surrender to Zeus. It played a significant role in highlighting Poseidon's sacrifice for his son. Poseidon's decision to prioritize his son's safety over his own glory and pride is a significant moment that proves his deep care for Percy. Zeus is not interested in the truth of who actually stole the bolt. The Kronos news didn't seem to affect him all that much. He only cared for the announcement of his victory.
Will declare my swift and crushing victory.
This had a nice contrast with Athena's action in the Arch episode, where she wanted to punish Annabeth for her wounded pride. Poseidon's sacrifice emphasized his role as a caring father, adding depth to his character and overall themes of the show. Maybe if the deadline didn't pass, Poseidon wouldn't have shown up to protect Percy. Anyway, that's just my thoughts. Let me know in the comments if you agree or not. Final 20 minutes of the episode truly struck an emotional chord with me. It felt dynamic, the fight between Luke and Percy was impactful. Charlie Bushnell delivered an incredible performance. The subtle changes in his face were brilliant. The finale wrapped up nicely all the storylines and set up things for season 2. We get an emotional goodbye from the trio, Percy reunites with his mother, and the looming threat of Kronos is still there.
Well, it turns out I'm pretty good at this. So when you are serious, come find me.
Oh wait, I'm not done yet. We still have to talk about the characters. So let's talk about our main trio, starting with Percy Jackson himself. Percy Jackson is a typical hero's journey story. So he goes on a quest in search for one thing, but he discovers himself. At the beginning, Percy is an outsider who feels lost and who struggles to understand where he belongs. The episodic structure is perfect for this type of story because the milestones of heroes' quests are the people and incidents that our heroes encounter along the way. Since the main theme of the show is internal growth and self-discovery, how those incidents affect the hero is in fact the plot. So Percy learns how to trust his friends, how to be brave, he learns of sacrifice, and he learns of a greater purpose. Percy's arc this season is to accept his divine heritage and save the day, or literally become a hero. His journey of self-discovery is complicated by his strained relationship with his absent father, Poseidon. Percy feels abandoned, and of course he seeks acknowledgement from him. By the end of the show, Percy does learn to embrace his identity as a demigod, and he does accept the responsibilities that come with it. And ultimately he finds his sense of belonging and purpose within the world of Greek mythology. So, good for Percy!
Yeah, I think I am the son of Poseidon.
Annabeth is Percy's quest companion and his future love interest, if you didn't notice. I didn't like that we learn everything about her from Luke. She respects the rules, she wants to play by the book, and her main motivation is to go on a quest because she really wants to prove herself to her mother, Athena. To be honest, there isn't much to say about Annabeth. Yes, she's super smart, to the show's detriment, because she figures out everything as soon as she walks into the frame. She's truly 6 steps ahead of everyone. Her main revelation this season is that the gods are not who they thought they were, that glory is not worth it. Her mom literally tried to kill her, yet we didn't exactly see how it affected Annabeth. I guess we'll find out next season. Leah's portrayal of Annabeth is amazing. She genuinely gives good performances, and I hope next season they give her better material to work with. Same goes for Grover. Honestly, poor Grover, the writers did him so dirty. Poor guy mainly served as an exposition device and delivering corny lines. Please write Grover some good dialogue next season. Arian deserves good material too. I love that the show introduced Grover Life's goal this season, but if we look at his character development, I would say there wasn't any. The show hinted at Grover feeling guilty for not saving Thalia, but for some reason that plot point was abandoned. It would have been cool if Grover had a significant moment where he helps in a battle or he sacrificed himself for a friend, but instead the writers made poor Grover lose the pearl. Although Grover did shine in the episode with Ares, where he outsmarted him and got the information he needed, but it didn't progress his character in any way. Speaking about the trio itself, I noticed that the show really loves separating them for some reason. If you really pay attention to the show, there are not a lot of moments where the trio operate together. I don't understand the logic behind it because the trio, they have amazing chemistry. And I like their banter, they look organic in the scene together. As Leah said in one of her interviews,
There's always a duo and a trio.
The problems of this show are solely with writing. And the next season we better see some improvement. The last character I want to talk about is Luke, our secret antagonist. I feel like I've already covered Luke pretty extensively in this video, but I just want to expand on that. So Luke is introduced to us as charismatic leader, a big brother who is respected in camp. He's the one that shows Percy around, he trains him, giving him all the lore. He hates gods because of what happened to his mother. He blames the gods and mainly his father, whom he resents. Luke is of course being manipulated by a true villain, Kronos. He's just a lost, hurt boy who made a wrong choice. Redemption arc incoming. I know all of this because I've read the book. And unfortunately in the show, Luke's character is not really fleshed out. The actor who portrays Luke does an amazing job in the last episode with subtle face expressions to demonstrate the pain and the inner conflict. But beyond that, the writers didn't really give him anything. First of all, his resentment towards his father doesn't really come across in the short amount of screen time Luke has.
Hermes is my father. That doesn't matter, we're all on the same team here.
He does mention that gods are bad guys and they create demigods to do their bidding and control them, but he doesn't seem particularly bitter about it. At least that's how it seems. We also get a backstory about his mom from Annabeth and not from him, which wasn't necessary this season. Another thing I wanted to mention is Luke's scar. It is a crucial part of his story. In the books, his father sent him on a quest that has already been done by a different hero. Luke failed this quest and he returned to camp in shame, and everyone was laughing at him. And that's where the resentment towards his father began. I feel like instead of having the backstory about his mom, they could have easily introduced that story about his scar, and it would have made much more sense, if you know what I'm saying. In the show, we see the scar, but the show never explains how Luke got it. They're probably saving it for next season, but at least give us something to hold on to. Luke never even expresses his feelings about his father to anyone. We just learn it from Annabeth that he hates him. His friendship with Percy is also not that believable, because they have such little meaningful interactions. In the first 2 episodes, Luke is mainly given exposition. We get that one scene where Luke trains Percy, and they never touch upon the subject of their parents or the feelings of abandonment they have. It makes me so frustrated because there's so much potential here, but for some reason it was wasted. So what did I learn after spending hours and hours on this video? I learned that the show is incredibly forgetful and it doesn't have the long-lasting impression. I had to watch this show 4 times to write this video because unfortunately most scenes are forgettable, and the reason they are forgettable is because they don't evoke an emotional response. Everything kind of happens on one level of dramatic scale and rarely picks up for an audience to feel impressed. There definitely were 1 or 2 emotional scenes that I loved, but literally just 2. I've already talked about the exposition problem and the problem of stakes and setup and payoff. And the only other thing I haven't mentioned is the mismatched tone of the show. Percy Jackson's series fails to strike the right balance between humor, action, and drama. And that's where it doesn't hold the attention of the viewer. Because the tone is so inconsistent. A lot of moments, jokes, or corny, cheesy lines feel so out of place within the overall narrative that it completely breaks out and stands out, and the show crumbles. So that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.